Welcome, Professor Sachs. We'll now introduce Professor Sachs as our first keynote speaker of the day. It's really a great honor. Gives me immense pleasure to introduce Professor Jeff Sachs, who will discuss pathways to sustainable development. He's a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, where he directed the Earth Institute from 2002 through 2016. He's president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or SDSN, and a commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Development. He's been an advisor to no less than 3 UN Secretaries General, currently serves as an SDG advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He spent over 20 years as a professor at Harvard University, where he received his BA, his MA, his PhD degrees. He's authored numerous best-selling books. His most recent book is The Ages of Globalization, Geography, Technology, and Institutions, and was released in 2020. He was twice named as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential world leaders and was ranked by The Economist among the top 3 most influential living economists. Welcome, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, to the University of Saskatchewan and to the People Around the World Conference.
Thank you very much, and great to be with you, and glad to be part of a group of people from around the world. We need global discussions, and so thanks to University of Saskatchewan for enabling us to have a global discussion. It's quite obvious that nothing in this world stays at home anymore, and nothing that we need to accomplish for our futures can be done other than through global understanding and cooperation. And that's really my theme of my remarks today. We're struggling, obviously. COVID-19 remains a huge danger to the world. We're not done with this damn pandemic, even though we're now 1 full year into it. And to solve COVID-19, we need a lot more global cooperation than we have had so far. That is obvious because nothing about a pandemic can be solved by one country alone. We see just in recent weeks how these dangerous new lineages emerging in the UK or in Brazil or in the United States or in South Africa spread within a few days and become very important, if not dominant, viral lineages in many other parts of the world. This just reminds us how interconnected we are, even when we're traveling much less, when we're in lockdown in many parts of the world. We simply cannot solve this crisis alone. And even the hopes for the technological miracle, and thank God our scientists and engineers are bringing us the miracle of a vaccine within a year of the inception of this pandemic. Even these vaccines, of course, remain at huge risk by virtue of the rapid mutation of the virus. It's clear that we're going to need boosters or new vaccines along the way, and there's growing likelihood that we're going to be living with this for a while to come. Well, this is just part of an even bigger story of interconnectedness. The world was not working all that well even before COVID-19. We were in a world of great stress and great instability. We had a madman as president of the United States, which by itself was a cause of global unrest, but it was also a symptom of how damaged American society is these days. To have a psychopath as president is not a good thing. And that's what we were suffering until January 20th of this year. More broadly, the world was not pulling together. Trump, of course, was a crude, racist nationalist, and yet he was treated as normal by a lot of people in the world, and there were a lot of Trumplets around the world. Many remain in power who exercise their own power with racism, fear, demagoguery, anti-science. It's pretty widespread, this lack of coordination and cooperation around science and technology-based solutions to big challenges. The world economy was not delivering equitable and broad-based growth. It was delivering great wealth at the top, especially for the new lords of the digital kingdom, whose wealth is beyond imagining. But for much of society and many parts of the world, incomes were stagnant or declining. And even in what was supposed to be a boom in the US, at least it was called that, we had half of our economy continuing to be in decline, because the disruptions of modern technology are so large that they in no way ensure broad-based and inclusive growth. And of course, COVID-19 is itself a reflection of a broad and deep phenomenon of environmental degradation that has been part and parcel of the way the world economy has functioned for centuries, actually, but certainly even in recent decades, where we've been claiming to do something about these environmental threats. The world economy has treated the natural environment as a free dumping ground, whether it's for greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's for pollutants such as toxic chemicals or plastics, whether it is as a waste ground for land clearing, deforestation, over harvesting of crops, hunting of species to extinction, overfishing of fisheries around the world. The environmental crises were also vast and largely not controlled. COVID-19 as a zoonotic disease, that is a transfer of a pathogen, in this case a corona beta virus, from an animal population, in this case a bat population, most likely in Southwest China, to human populations, is an increasingly frequent occurrence as well. So we've had SARS, which was also a bat coronavirus. We had MERS, which is another coronavirus spread by camels in the Middle East, which reached East Asia as well. In the past decade, we've had the spread of Zika virus. We've had H1N1 recombinant influenza, Nipah virus, Ebola outbreaks, again, a bat zoonotic disease. So we've had increasing frequency of new emerging zoonoses as well, which are reflective of the disruptions of the natural environment by encroachments of humans, mainly farmers, into animal populations where these animals are reservoirs of these pathogens. All in all, what I would say is that the world was on a dangerous course before 2020, and then hit the calamity of SARS-CoV-2 with a COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic created the sharpest economic shock since World War II, a decline of world output, perhaps of around 5% of GDP, the largest disruption since World War II. 2 million dead, 400,000 of them plus in the United States, and an ongoing pandemic and ongoing disruption of world society. Not only has this been a calamity still unsolved, but it contributed massively, of course, to an even wider gap between rich and poor. While much of the world was suffering lockdowns, unemployment, loss of remittance income, hunger, the richest people in the world, to be precise, the 500 wealthiest people in the world, experienced a capital gain, a rise of wealth of $1.7 trillion since January 1st, 2020. So you can't make it up how bizarre this is, that in the deepest economic crisis in at least since World War II, if not the Great Depression, you have the world's richest people becoming phenomenally richer at the same moment. So this is the broad picture, unfortunately, a world that has been poorly led, poorly governed, non-cooperative, not facing up to widening inequalities of wealth and income, or the environmental catastrophes of human-induced climate change, loss of biodiversity. So let me turn to, from calamity to solutions. What is sustainable development? It is a term of art introduced back in 1987 by Dr. Gru Brundtland when she chaired the Brundtland Commission and called on the world to adopt a new framework for the world economy and for global cooperation. And the idea of sustainable development is that we need to take care of each other and of the planet according to our deepest objectives of well-being. When sustainable development was first introduced as an idea back in 1987, the idea was that the current generation should take care of the planet to ensure that future generations would have a viable planet to live on. The concept has been broadened out in important ways to say that what we're looking for is prosperity that is widely shared, societies that are inclusive, non-discriminatory, operating according to rule of law, and bringing everybody along in better lives, and sustainable environmentally, and addressing the critical crises of climate, pollution, habitat, and zoonotic diseases. That's the idea of sustainable development. As I was indicating, we were way off trajectory to achieve it. Our two critical guiding pathways for sustainable development for our generation are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, both of which were agreed by all nations of the world at the end of 2015, neither of which is being achieved successfully, and both of which are hanging in the balance now, especially in the COVID age. So our objective is to shift the way that our economies function, the direction of change of economic life, to achieve sustainable development. What does that entail? It entails global cooperation to ensure that no part of the world is left behind, and global cooperation to ensure that all parts of the world invest in the core areas needed to achieve sustainable development. Those areas of investment are in education for all our children, in public health and health care, in low carbon energy, in circular technologies to clean up our wastes from industrial production, in sustainable land use practices, in redesigning our cities for social inclusion and productivity in the digital age, and for ensuring that all people in the world can be part of the benefits of a digital economy, which can bring new services, e-governance, telemedicine, e-education, e-banking, e-payments, to people who otherwise were excluded from these services. But even there, with the miracles of the digital world, only half the world accesses the internet currently. The other half will fall disastrously behind unless this digital divide is overcome. So we need to find ways to cooperate for global investments in health, education, clean energy, sustainable cities, sustainable agriculture, and digital access for all. It's a pretty low cost for very high returns if we are able to coordinate and cooperate for these objectives. It will be a disaster for all if we fail. In the immediate future, our challenge is COVID-19, because that is the obviously most urgent obstacle to achieving anything we want. Safety, survival, social and political stability, and the prospect for economic and sustainable development in the future. Even on COVID-19, to this moment, we don't have proper global cooperation. We have not properly financed the international effort to ensure vaccine coverage for everybody in the world. A few rich countries are grabbing what they can of the vaccines, and the global multilateral process to ensure vaccines for everybody is waiting back in the queue to be able to obtain and distribute the vaccines for the developing countries. Just a handful of the world, the US, Europe, and China, have received about 80% of the immunization doses to date. And much of the world in Africa, Asia, and Latin America has had zero so far of access to the immunizations. We also have an immediate and pressing financial crisis in many developing countries. The rich countries are able to borrow massively. They're financing spending with large budget deficits and strong monetary financing. In the United States, emergency funding so far has been around $3 trillion. And President Biden is asking for another $1.9 trillion of emergency support. The Federal Reserve, our central bank, has increased the money supply by about $3 trillion. So the US is able to keep spending, but what about poor countries? Their spending is completely constrained by the lack of creditworthiness, the lack of a strong currency. And so they suffer not only the losses of income, but the inability for governments to combat that temporary shortfall as the rich countries are doing. Where is the global solidarity there? We need more emergency international financing. The IMF played a very constructive role in 2020. It needs to play an even larger role in 2021 as our multilateral institution established for this kind of emergency. But fighting COVID-19 is only the first step of getting our heads on straight and moving forward in a better direction. And let me close by noting that 2021 should be the year not only of ending the pandemic, but also the year of setting a new course for the future. And the good news is that we have a political mandate to set that new course, and a number of important gatherings, mainly in the second part of this year, in which we can establish a new direction for the entire world. So if we do our homework right and massively increase vaccine deployment and public health during this year, we can look to the second half of the year in a number of gatherings to reset how the world economy is oriented and how it functions. There are three big international conferences in the second half of 2021 that will be extremely propitious for a new direction. In September of this year, there will be important gatherings at the UN, especially a World Food System Summit, to chart out a new path for sustainable farming and sustainable diets to break what is now a disaster of malnutrition in the world and a disaster of unsustainable land use practices. So that's in September. In October, there will be a conference hosted by China on protecting biodiversity. This is COP15, or the Conference of the Parties' 15th meeting of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And it will take place, if people are traveling, in Kunming, China in October. The purpose of COP15 is to stop the rampant deforestation and environmental destruction taking place in the Amazon, in the Congo Basin, in the Indonesian archipelago, in the oceans, in many parts of the world where we have a collapse of biodiversity, a loss of species, extinction rates that are at horrific levels, 1,000 times higher than the pre-industrial rates of natural extinction. And we have an opportunity in October in Kunming to set sustainable land use practices to end this horrible onslaught on the environment. And then in November is the COP26, or the 26th meeting of the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the opportunity for all governments to come with clear commitments and plans to decarbonize the world energy system by 2050. This is vital for ending the horrible and rising dangers of human-induced climate change that has already made 2020 the hottest year in world records, tied roughly with 2016, but with signs everywhere of huge and growing threats from human-induced climate change, rising sea levels, storms, droughts, floods, heat waves, massive forest fires worldwide. And so the meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, COP26, at the beginning of November, is the opportunity for all governments to say, we're getting out of the fossil fuel business. Now, let me just close by saying that this is our work as academics and as thought leaders to help people everywhere understand what needs to be done and to help push politicians to do it. Politicians, in my country at least, are not problem solvers. They're not typically very bold. They're not in front of the line. They need to be pushed, helped, cajoled, given plans to move in the right direction. Of course, things got disastrously worse in the US recently under Trump because he was a nut on top of everything else and a sadist on top of everything else. Now, at least we have sanity. We have talent back in government, but we still need to push hard to get the kinds of policy changes needed. Canada is going to have to do its hard work as well. Both the US and Canada grew up as fossil fuel economies. We have Texas in the United States. Canada has Alberta. Both push the fossil fuel agenda very hard. Understandable, perhaps, but not wise and not what the world needs right now. The world needs decarbonization, and Canada and the United States should both get on track to help lead that global effort. We don't need more pipelines. We don't need the Trans Mountain pipeline. We did not need the Keystone pipeline. We don't need more fossil fuels. We need to build out our renewable energy urgently. And that's the message that both of our governments and governments all over the world should bring to Glasgow in November. So let me conclude and open up for discussion. I want to thank the University of Saskatchewan for the chance to make a few remarks and to emphasize that we really need a change of direction in this world. And it's not just COVID-19, and it's not just short-term macroeconomics, and it's not just getting the vaccines delivered. Even COVID-19, this huge, disastrous occurrence, is itself a clear warning sign of our poor governance and our irresponsibility to nature. And the rich countries have not accorded themselves well in this process. We're not ready, and we've not addressed this well, and we have still a real challenge ahead to bring this pandemic under decisive control. But let's do it and learn the lessons as well, that we need a new direction, and we need to cooperate in all parts of the world to achieve that new direction. Let's really work hard together to make 2021 a turning point so that we can say that we helped put the world on the path to sustainable development. Thanks very much. Happy New Year to everybody. Stay safe, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I don't know if I'm inspired or depressed, probably a little both, but fantastic. And I really appreciate it. We all really appreciate your straight talk. And, you know, as an American, I also appreciate your straight talk about the craziness of the last 4 years. So we'll move into the question and answer period now. And during this time, the chat will be turned on, and audience members are welcome to type questions in the chat box. Please don't forget to select everyone as the chat recipient. Otherwise, you might just be talking to an individual person. And to get us started, Professor Sachs, I'll start with I'll just get things rolling. So, you know, you made the point many times that we need a multilateral approach. And you talked about the IMF, but are there countries, you know, can the United States play a leadership role again? Who's going to take the lead? And, you know, we can start by thinking about COVID and then more generally the SDGs.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think that the way that the world can govern itself responsibly is mainly through regional cooperation and the regions cooperating with the other regions. I mean the following. We have 193 member states in the United Nations. It's a pretty complicated scenario to have 193 countries with their bilateral relations with the other 192 countries. If you do the math, it's 193 times 192 over 2 bilateral relations. It's too complicated. We need a way to make this system work. And there are two basic ways to do that, in my view. One is that we abide by common global standards so that we take seriously the Paris Climate Agreement or the SDGs or the Convention on Biological Diversity. The other is that we cooperate with our neighbors closely, and we form strong regional groups that can interact effectively with strong regional groups elsewhere. The European Union, I think, is a model for this if it works. And I'm a huge fan of the EU in many ways, but especially a fan of the concept of the EU. I'm a fan of the concept of a united North America, of Canada, the United States, and Mexico really working together to solve problems of our continent. I would like to see Latin America working much more closely together than it does. I would like to see Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, not on two sides of a kind of almost Cold War divide, but actually cooperating closely on solving problems of energy, water, air pollution, and so on, which are common to neighbors. South Asia is another very important region that doesn't cooperate. In fact, of course, India and Pakistan are two nuclear powers in profound conflict and distrust of each other. No trade between the two countries. Two huge neighbors that ought to be engaged together on protecting the Indus River, protecting the Punjab, solving problems of the Himalayas, working on interconnected energy, and so on. But instead, they're at war, basically, with each other. The Middle East, the same way. We're way past the time when we can afford another Middle East war, or even the divisions between Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, other regional leaders. We need cooperation because the problems in those regions are absolutely shared. So I would like to see North America, the European Union, East Asia. Actually, there's a nice grouping called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is an Asia-Pacific region. South Asia, the African Union, as strong regional groups solving problems within the regions and engaged in diplomacy with the other regions, EU, AU, North America, because I think that way we could actually get to real solutions.
Didn't realize I was still on unmute. Okay, so that was really excellent, Jeff, and I really resonates with me as someone who's tried to think about these things from a global water perspective and looking at global groundwater depletion and how it's impacting food security and same sort of things. You've got these aquifers that are all around the world that are being depleted. You need regional cooperation, but you need a global framework as well. So I wish we had more time to chat about that, but
isn't it the case, Jay, that how could you think about water solutions nation by nation when riversheds are shared? It's impossible. And how could you solve the problems of any major river system that way? You're exactly right.
Yeah, it's really a challenge. It's pretty daunting, and so these are sort of the problems. So one of the questions I was going to ask, but you alluded to the answer already, is the role that universities can play. And what I like about universities is that I see the same thing in the water world, that the politicians and some of the higher level decision makers don't really know what to do. They may or may not be engaged. It's our job to educate them, to help them understand what can be done, and also to communicate to the public.
I think that, of course, we should be in a knowledge era because we need knowledge-based solutions. And we get glimpses of that, of course, with the vaccine, for example. It's brilliant that science was able within a year to come up with several vaccines, in fact, against this new virus. That is such a reflection of the sophistication of this knowledge. It has worked in that case. As soon as you get past the science and the engineering to the human side, how do we distribute it? How do we pay for it? How do we cooperate? That's where things start to fall apart. But what it does mean is that whether it's in energy or land use or water and hydrology more generally, we need expertise. Governments typically don't have it. Politicians almost surely don't have it. That's not their training. That's not their background. And so we need ways to bring knowledge to bear to solve problems in a practical and real way. And that means, as knowledge institutions, universities have not only an important role, they have an important responsibility as well. As academics, we can get awfully academic sometimes, too far removed from the practical problem solving to be helpful. And so we have our homework to do to be helpful, but governments need to understand this is not a job for politicians mainly. This is a job for all of society, tapping the knowledge wherever it exists so that we can really move to real solutions.
I agree with you 100%. I think we also have our responsibility as academics, and you're right. I mean, we really need to improve our science communication skills to keep to keep the message at a high level about what needs to be done. Obviously, you and I could go on forever and ever, but I want to now scan the chat and look for some questions. Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, how do you explain this phenomenon? If the rich benefit immensely from the diseases and disasters, how can they help reduce or eliminate them?
That's easy. They could pay their taxes. We have to levy taxes on them, and then they have to pay them. And I saw in the news this morning that Senator Elizabeth Warren is going to join the Senate Finance Committee and is going to put on the table wealth taxation. This is absolutely the right thing to do right now. Just to give you that grounding that I mentioned briefly, the richest 500 people in the world have net worth now of $7.7 trillion, 500 people. Most of that is sheltered. In some cases, all of that is tax sheltered. The technology shift to digital has fueled that. It made Elon Musk the richest person in the world, Jeffrey Bezos at number 2, and so forth. And these are great technologies, but no one needs or should have $200 billion in their financial accounts. That's absurd. It's a breakdown of the most basic ethics and logic. We need a solution to that because we need to make sure that the world's not run for 500 people or a few million people. We have almost 8 billion people in the world, and everybody needs enough to eat, safe water, sanitation, power, access to digital services, and that's what we should be working on. And rich people can be good philanthropists and make a big difference, as Bill Gates has in public health, for example, very big difference. But rich people should also pay their taxes, and we should also be organizing the economy so that wealth is not simply flowing to the top.
So let's follow up on that. So next question, can you speak to us about your concept of a post-capitalist world order? As an economist, could you provide direction on what this might look like? And what is the role of social development in this evolution?
We need an economy that is a mixed economy. that has markets, that has corporate capital, that has financial markets for raising capital. There's a lot of benefit that comes from that. But what goes wrong is when that becomes the center of our economic and social lives rather than a part, because we need strong universal services. Canada has universal health care. The United States does not. You lose your job in the US, you lose your health coverage. And that is absurd. That's not the way to organize access to health. Education in the United States at the tertiary level is largely privately funded, so we have households with $1.7 trillion of student debt. This is also quite unusual from the perspective of high-income countries, most of which finance higher education for all. So the role of government is extremely important in ensuring basic economic needs, in ensuring that critical areas of health, education, and infrastructure are assured for all. We also need decency for all, and that includes decent work, safety in the work environment, vacation time, leisure time, family leave time, sick leave time that's paid and assured. And again, the US is a bit of an outlier because we have a system and an ideology that, for a lot of reasons, of which I would put racism as probably the core reason, developed so as not to take care of people in need. And that is raw capitalism, and it's a disaster for a large part of a population, even in the midst of wealth. So I would put the emphasis, in short, on sustainable development as the conceptual framework and a mixed economy as the institutional framework that has markets and government and a proper regulatory environment to ensure that the economy operates within environmental boundaries and that it ensures social inclusion and access for all to economic needs, which, by the way, in 1948, we rightly called universal human rights. And Americans don't want to remember that, but education and healthcare and social protection are not nice things to have. They're not privileges. They are universal human rights.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up, Jeff. Thanks so much for a fantastic talk. Excellent discussion. Just imagine us all giving you a standing ovation now.
Thanks a lot.
We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, and all best wishes on the conference, and we'll circle back soon, I hope.
Thanks very much, Jeff.
Very good. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.